hello. Happy Friday. I hope everyone had a wonderful Christmas. Happy 2020. That's insane. I hope everyone had a very safe and fantastic New Year's. And it's election year. We are officially in the year of crazy. And I'm pretty ready for it. And I hope all of you are too. And we have to kick off the new year right. And I thought, what a better way to ring in 2020 than to talk about the topic that is on everyone's mind. Millennials love it. Older generations despise it. And God is just looking down on all of us thinking y'all are insane. We're going to talk about socialism. And I always think this is an issue that has been so exhausted. I feel like the evils of socialism gets talked about constantly. But apparently, my generation has an extraordinarily thick skull because facts don't seem to be able to penetrate it. And I'm talking specifically about a recent survey conducted by YouGov in their annual report on U.S. attitudes towards socialism, communism, and collectivism that came out last October. And oh my goodness, the findings were astonishing. We had some Trump derangement paired with historical illiteracy, entitlement, logical absurdity, and it's all established and reinforced by leftist indoctrination. And I'm going to go through some of the key findings and talk about the bad, the really bad, and the ugly. And I hope you're just excited as I am right now. So hold on and get ready to be even more disappointed in millennials than you already are. So YouGov surveyed 2,518 respondents, and the most insane and scary findings that I thought came about was 70% of millennials say they are likely to vote socialist. 36% of millennials showed support for communism, which is up 8% from just last year. And 43% of millennials believe that the Communist Manifesto better guarantees freedom and equality over the Declaration of Independence. I would now like to take a moment of silence for all of the brain cells that have died in order to achieve this way of thinking. RIP, brain cells. Oh my goodness. Okay. We've been hearing about the rising support of socialism for years now, but communism, straight up communism, is now gaining traction. For a while there, the so-called democratic socialists tried to separate themselves from communism, saying they're not the same, but now they're really letting the cat out of the bag. So I posted this survey on Facebook, and I had some comments that socialism is more closely related to capitalism than communism. This would be true if up was down, cats were dogs, the earth was flat, and I drove a Prius. That's how true that is. Communism is downstream from socialism. Socialism is merely a stepping stone to communism. The only difference between the two is that government is the government control of all resources. So in communism, there's basically no private property. So think about it. Do you really believe if we implement a socialistic society where the government owns the products of our labor, that the government will stop at that? Of course not. As we've been seeing for decades, the government grows bigger and bigger, and as we've extended power to it, it takes more and more. If we give them the ends of production, they will take the means. Of course, socialism will progress, or I should say regress, to communism. And that's not being alarmist, that's being historically accurate. The reason for the popularity of socialism and communism is not only due to the terrible education system, but it's a complete misunderstanding of what socialism and communism even are. All we've seen in our lives is relative prosperity, free markets, and liberty. We are unbelievably fortunate. I'm talking to the richest as well as the poorest among us. If you're American, you've been spoiled. And I'm talking in universal terms. My mom and her entire family grew up in communism. Millions of immigrants have escaped socialism and communism to come to America for freedom and opportunity. And millions were not so lucky. Yet we want to bring the evil, unjust, oppressive, and authoritarian regime here? It makes absolutely zero sense. The only justification for wanting to establish a society of complete centralized federal control is just ignorance. This survey also found that 72% of Americans, not just millennials this time, of Americans incorrectly say that communism has killed less than 100 million people in the past 100 years. So almost 3/4 of Americans don't know or don't believe that more than 100 million people died from communist rule alone in the past century. In my opinion, you can lump these people in with the ones that deny or don't know about the Holocaust. And I'm starting off 2020 in a sassy mood with this topic because I honestly think it's warranted. This is one of those topics where if you even have a shred of a prefrontal cortex, you should know better. I think some tough love is needed to snap my generation and all those who believe that they know better than our founders and the great capitalist thinkers before us out of this utter absurdity. We are actually intellectually regressing if this is the path we choose to take. Because this is what socialist movements have caused. I'm going to break down those more than 100 million deaths in the past 100 years. 21 million Soviet citizens were put to death by the regime or died as a result of its oppressive communist policies. Those 21 million included 200,000 killed during the Red Terror, 11 million dead from famine, 700,000 executed during the Great Terror, 400,000 more executed during 1929 to 1953, and 1.6 million dead during forced population transfers, and a minimum of 2.7 million dead in the Gulag, labor colonies, and special settlements. Let's move over to the great People's Republic of China. 82 million died in communist China, of which 20 million were political prisoners killed during captivity, 55 million dead during the so-called Great Leap Forward and the Great Mao Famine, 2,000 monks and pilgrims killed in the Chinese bombardment against the Great Tibetan Monastery, and 78,000 Tibetans dead from starvation and rebellion, 1,000 in the Tiananmen Massacre. The list goes on. 4.6 million died in communist North Korea, 3.8 million in Vietnam, 2.4 million in Cambodia, 1.5 million in Afghanistan, 1.2 million in Yugoslavia, where my mom was from, and just shy of 1 million in East Germany. I could go on and on and on, but you get the picture. This is socialism. This is communism. Dead bodies. Why are we raging against capitalism? Not because of famine, not because of concentration camps or mass executions or extreme poverty. It's because we get jealous that some people are richer than we are. We rather spend our time being, travel bloggers instead of working a 9-to-5. And we think income inequality is one of our biggest threats. And we're seeing the use of class warfare as some sort of solution to that. So let's talk about that for a minute. Let me tell you something. The term income inequality means nothing. It holds zero merit or indication in the well-being of a country and its population. Why in the world do you care if the gap between you and the richest person in the nation is large when you're both better off? Countries with much lower income inequality than the United States are some of the poorest countries in the world. Burundi, Slovenia, Uruguay, Tanzania, Morocco are some of the many countries that have less income inequality than the United States, yet have a GNI per capita that doesn't even come close to that of the US. And many advocates of socialism advocate for redistribution and make the argument that wealth inequality is the real problem, not income inequality. And Well, wealth inequality refers to not only income, but the standard of living as a whole. So it's your assets, that make up your net worth. But the disparity in wealth includes the number of households that hold the most wealth ownership versus who hold the least. So it's the same premise. So let's go back to that list of countries that have less income inequality than the United States. Those countries also have less wealth inequality, or in other words, are more evenly distributed in wealth. So according to the left's logic, because countries like Slovenia and Uruguay and Morocco have higher levels of equality of income and wealth in the United States, they should be better off. However, they're not. Not even close. Why? Because income and wealth inequality are both meaningless. If I average a daily income of $50 and the wealthiest average is $100 a day, there is income inequality. Then, say the economy is doing well and everything, and the wealthiest increases their $100 to $400, and mine increases to $150. There is more inequality now. The difference between the wealthiest and me is a bigger gap. Am I worse off in the second scenario? No. The wealthy got wealthier, and so did I. Now, this is a very simple example of what's happening, but it's not only happening in the United States, it's happening globally. Statistically, the rich are getting richer and the poor are getting richer. The huge argument that leftists love to make is that the middle class is shrinking because of capitalism. It's true, the middle class is shrinking. But it's not because people are moving down, it's because people are moving up in income brackets at a higher rate. So people are still increasingly moving into the middle class from below the poverty line, but people in the middle class are moving up at faster rates. But in any case, everyone is moving up. Here are some of my favorite statistics. For at least 1 year, 73% of Americans will be in the top 20% of income earners in their lifetime. And well over half of Americans will be in the top 10%. No one denies that there is still poverty that should be addressed. However, the percentage of people that stay below the poverty line for more than a decade is 3%. While the percentage of Americans that stay in the top 1% for the same time frame is even lower. Only 1.1% of Americans will stay in the top 1% for more than a decade. Now, I always advocate for helping the least of us. The United States spends an overwhelming majority of its budget on welfare and government assistance. That's well over 60%. We spend more on the war on poverty than any country in the world. Yet our poverty rate hasn't budged since the establishment of our massive welfare state. It's not like America is sitting back and doing nothing about the poor in this country. And only having 3% of the population stay poor for more than 10 years is pretty dang good. I mean, I wish it was at zero, but we will never completely alleviate poverty no matter what. No system will ever do that. People advocating for socialist policies and redistribution are trying to fix problems that are actually minimized thanks to our current system. And I hate the word redistribution. I should say distribution. It's more accurate. Redistribution assumes that wealth was distributed in the first place. It wasn't handed out. Wealth is generated. So, for instance, Jeff Bezos, he has a net worth of about $166 billion. Bill Gates has a net worth of $104 billion, and Elon Musk is about $20 billion. None of these men went to the south side of Chicago, broke into a single mother's home, and stole her money and belongings to get where they are. The wealth of these men, like the vast majority of wealth made in modern America, is self-made off of the mutually beneficial transactions of capitalism. And if Jeff Bezos didn't have hundreds of billions of dollars, where do you think that money would go? To you? To me? Would I have more money in my pocket because Jeff didn't have billions of dollars in his? No, the money wouldn't exist. It wouldn't be in the market. Like I said, it was generated. It had to be made. The money only entered the market when Jeff Bezos provided a product in exchange. You wouldn't have more money in your pocket if Jeff Bezos had less or none at all. In fact, you would be the one with less because you would be spending more money on expensive products than the cheap ones you get on Amazon. Yet, despite being the economic system responsible for putting the global poverty rate below 10%, of being responsible for uplifting the most people from starvation and oppression and bringing about the most freedom and democracy than any other economic system in the history of man, we see many in this country blaming capitalism for any poverty that exists, no matter how small the percentage. Here's the harsh reality. Again, poverty will never be eliminated. It can only be minimized. No other system in the world can minimize poverty to low levels like free market capitalism can. And in many regards, capitalism isn't even a formal system, but rather the allowance of freedom to flourish. It's more like an environment. The ideals of capitalism are simple and purist in nature. They are voluntary transactions that make up the market, and you own the fruits of your labor. And of course, some levels of governmental interference, such as property rights protections, are necessary. Therefore, capitalism is not the direct causation of wealth. It is the environment needed for individuals to create wealth. And I know some people that disagree with me are saying, but Alyssa, the type of socialism we're talking about hasn't been tried before. How many of you have heard that? Drives me nuts. Do you know who else thought they were doing socialism the quote unquote right way? Stalin, Mao, Lenin, and every single country that's implemented socialism and crashed and burned. We didn't all of a sudden come up with a brand new concept. We're very full of ourselves. We're very narcissistic that way. Socialist ideals have been around since the beginning of time. They've been tried in hundreds of countries over hundreds of years and have resulted in the same outcome, which I'm pretty sure is the definition of insanity. Doing the same thing over and over and expecting a different result. And no, socialism is not the Scandinavian countries. Bernie and the Bernie Bros love using Denmark, Sweden, Norway, and the Nordic nations as examples to emulate here in the US. And I love that, I think this was, I want to say 2015 or 16, the Danish prime minister even came out and said, no, we're not a socialist country. He said, quote, I know that some people in the US associate the Nordic model with some sort of socialism. Therefore, I would like to make one thing clear. Denmark is far from a socialist planned economy. Denmark is a market economy. And he's right. The Nordic model is based on free market capitalism, and they have social programs stacked on top of it. Social democracy is not the same as socialism or even democratic socialism. The only reason an extensive welfare state and a universal healthcare somewhat works in the Nordic model is because it's held up by a capitalist framework. And it also extremely helps that the populations of these countries are about 5 white people. They're tiny populations and they're homogenous. So to put it in perspective, my home state of Wisconsin has the same GDP as the entire country of Denmark. The state of Georgia has the GDP of Sweden, Maryland has the same as Norway, and Louisiana has the same size economy as Finland. It is much easier to uphold social safety nets and programs at this magnitude. And the prosperity seen in the Nordic countries pre-existed their socialist-style policies. Free markets and oil created a boom in these nations. It was actually social programs that started slashing their GDP. So the Nordic states are started to reverse course on their economic policies by cutting taxes and welfare benefits. Sweden is a good example. So Sweden actually did used to be a socialist country. Sweden expanded its welfare state enormously in the 70s, which led the nation's GDP to drop well below its European competitors. Then in the 90s, a counter movement to socialism gained traction and the country slashed its corporate taxes in half. And the tax on share dividends was abolished. The tax on capital gains from shares was reduced greatly and then eventually eliminated. The top marginal income tax rate was cut by a third. Wealth taxes were abolished as well as inheritance and gift taxes. And while still very high, income taxes were greatly reduced. And now, Sweden is seeing success and is among the top 20 most market-oriented economies in the world, and Bernie Sanders thinks it's because of mythical democratic socialism. It's despite it. The Nordic model relies on a strong capitalist base. Even then, the social programs are inhibiting the growth potential that they could see with a freer and more capitalistic economy. To pretend this is even remotely close to the socialistic takeover the left wants is ridiculous. Socialism done right, if you want to see that, look at Venezuela. Socialism done right is the Soviet Union. Bringing the Nordic model to the United States is also foolish. In fact, if you want to see actual sort of democratic socialism / Nordic model, look at our healthcare system. It's flawed, it's frustrating, and it's expensive. That's because it's a free market base trying to hold up social programs. It's two economic systems battling it out, and it's not working. You can't have Medicare and Medicaid only pay out 80%, leaving the private sector to foot the bill and expect that to work smoothly. The government can't even get the post office or DMV right, but some people want them to take over $1 billion industry with millions of employees. We are $21 trillion in debt. Over 10 years, universal healthcare will cost $32 trillion, and some estimates go up to $44 trillion. To fully fund Bernie Sanders' proposed Medicare for all, it would require taxpayers to pay double what they do today. And universal healthcare does not even mean universal access. Look at Britain and Canada. In 2017, the British NHS canceled 84,827 elective operations. It canceled 4,076 urgent operations and had 50,000 so-called non-urgent surgeries in flu season canceled. In 2017, Canadians were on waiting lists for an estimated 1,040,791 total procedures. The median wait time for surgery, for arthroplastic surgery, ranged from 20 to 52 weeks. In fact, if you want quality and timely healthcare in Canada, they'll refer you to private practice or say, go jump the border. Even with our current system, the United States has the best healthcare in the world. Imagine if it was more free market based without the come down of large social programs. People in those countries with socialized medicine still come here when they need major surgery and cancer treatment. I'm going to have to do an entire episode on healthcare in the insurance industry. It's very extensive. It's super overly complicated. And I'm a financial analyst full-time. I work for a pharmaceutical benefits management company. So the drug industry itself, with their plans and formularies, is a whole other beast. And I think it would be a good idea to really break it down. But to go back to the survey, I want to touch on the Trump derangement portion of the findings. And these results are so indicative of the disconnect many Americans have with reality when it comes to their feelings towards the president. The study found that about 1 in 4 Americans across every generation see President Trump as the biggest threat to world peace over Kim Jong-un and Vladimir Putin. Let me get this straight. Kim Jong-un, dictator, had his own uncle executed by a firing squad. Putin, a dictator through rigged elections, has journalists and critics that speak out against him killed. They're conveniently found dead constantly. Trump, duly elected, tweets a lot. But yes, Trump is the threat to the stability of the world. I'm sorry, but if you are one of those people that actually believes this, you're not motivated by anything remotely resembling rationale or logic. You're motivated by disdain for a man. Men like Putin and Kim Jong-un, they are murderous. They're vile, evil people who have no problem killing off their own people to get ahead. It's sick. I don't understand the lack of awareness or inability to control your hatred for someone politically to the point where you think a duly elected leader of the free world is the biggest hindrance to world peace. As you can see so far, the results of the survey were frankly disturbing. A lot of you might be thinking that this is a one-off survey that just got a bad batch of respondents. That could be true to some extent, but it's also true that these results are pretty consistent with many other polls and surveys conducted by research groups and think tanks regarding attitudes towards socialism in the past couple of years. This is real. It's scary, but it's real. This way of thinking is a very dangerous threat. We are in a war to keep the building blocks of our nation intact. Free market capitalism, individualism, and self-determinism are key reasons as to why we enjoy the freedom, liberty, and prosperity at levels seen in no other nation on earth. They are also in direct conflict with the ideals of socialism and communism. There are multiple reasons as to why socialism is extremely popular among my age group and why even communism now is starting to gain momentum. First, there's, of course, the education system that is radically left that just pushes these ideas. Second, when you grow up in a society that's been a world leader in freedom and prosperity, you become sanguine and you become entitled to the very ideals that enabled our fortune in the first place. And third, culturally, we're straying away from traditional American ideals. The farther away you get from the beliefs that created this country, the more insane you get. We have a growing disdain for God in Western culture. And capitalism was born out of the belief in both. So how do we combat this epidemic of intellectual deficiency? We speak up. We push back. We get involved. This happened in part because the right sat back and let it happen. The right sat back and let the left completely overhaul education. That's why I named my show Be a Voice. Notice it's not Be an Opinion. Everyone has an opinion. Who cares? Honestly, who cares? Everyone and their mother has an opinion. Simply having an opinion is not being a voice. Being a voice is being active. It's backing up your position with facts, and it's encouraging others to do the same. That's how we shift the attitudes in this country. It will only come if we are the force behind that shift. It will only come if everyone decides to be a voice. And that's my analysis on the insanity of socialism and communism rising in this country. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope everyone had a great New Year's. Please, if you have any questions or comments, please email me at contact@alyssaAhlgren.com. Go on Apple Podcasts, leave a 5-star review. It helps people find the show. And thanks again. I will see you next week.